Okay, great. And we have Tom Callahan here, which is great because he can give us a little history on the evolution of the wind bylaw and how it came about and how it got amended and what the opposition to it was. So Tom, are you there? Can you hear? Tom?
Yep. Ta-da.
There he
Hi,
is.
there he
Yep.
is. Great.
What opposition are you talking about?
Well, I think in the 2010s, there were a couple of large municipal sized projects that were supposed to go in to Cohasset up on Turkey Hill. One was on Turkey Hill and one was on the Grand Waste site. And there was quite a bit of citizen uproar. And so they got shot down.
That was, those were proposals to put to put a big wind turbine on Turkey Hill.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. On the trustees' property.
Yeah. Yeah. And it was, people were, so I'll see it from Sandy Beach while I'm swimming. It was kind of ridiculous, but it's kind of also irrelevant to why I'm here, but with all due respect, not proposing to build big wind turbines anymore. The point of the bylaw changes that are proposed is simply to move stuff that may change more quickly, permitting processes or technical specs, and move them out of the bylaw and into regulations so they can be changed far more easily. The solar bylaw has no substantive changes proposed. It's just really to do the housekeeping of moving all the junk out. And what changes needed to be made with respect to solar energy that the Attorney General wanted was done last fall as part of the amendments to Article 4, which is the article regarding uses. So the substantive material that needed to be done regarding solar energy has been done. And on the wind bylaw, again, it's the same principle: get the stuff out that shouldn't be in a bylaw. And the bylaw was written, I don't know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago by your predecessors. And the only substantive change in the wind article that I'm proposing is to allow for turbines on the scale that you put on your roof or your yard, for individual building scale. And the only thing I need help with from your committee is what's the size, what's the megawatt hour size for that. We have a megawatt hour, megawatt limit for large turbines. So what's the appropriate limit for a small turbine? And I sent an email to the Federal Department of Energy to try to get that, and I haven't, of course, lost in the bureaucracy, so I haven't heard that. So, but this is not intended to be complicated, and it's not intended to be overthought and overwrought. It's simply housekeeping more than anything else. And again,
so Tom, if we could give you an answer right now. I mean, I think we've done some research, and there are 10 kilowatt options and 15 kilowatt options, but they're rather large. I mean, it's are you not concerned about that? You just simply want a power rating and all the other
I'm just
stuff.
trying to, the thought is that as we go into the future and need alternative energy, that we should have all kinds of means at our disposal. We have solar energy at the individual building scale. I have seen small turbines in other parts of the country on an individual building scale. I presume they exist. They don't look like windmills all the time, the traditional windmill. But
yeah, they're vertical, and they're the ones you recognize. Then they're these vertical ones, like at the electrical union headquarters there off of 93.
Yeah, something.
But
like
I mean, so you're not concerned about height stuff, and I mean, The height of a 15 kilowatt generator is what? It's about 100 feet or so.
It's about 135 feet, I think.
135 feet.
Yeah.
So
It's got to be at least 30 feet taller than anything within about 300 feet.
And if it's
Just to
not
catch the
feasible,
wind.
then it's not feasible, it's not feasible for 100 kilowatt. I simply want to know if you like the idea and what's the regulatory size limit, that's all.
well, I mean,
Tom,
Tom,
Tom, a quick question. Sorry, just to ask, because you're asking about the the kind of kilowatt capacity. I mean, is that measure the only thing that you feel like needs to be in the bylaws, and then everything else, noise levels, height, setback,
Shadow.
kind of the rest, yeah, the rest of the stuff would be left to regulatory? Is that the idea?
All right, the bylaw that we have today regulates all of that for large turbines. Correct? It has setbacks, it has height limits, it has everything, doesn't it? What I'm suggesting is, I don't know if you could circulated the draft where I show you what the bylaw will look like after moving that stuff out, and then I added at the end the stuff that moves. And the point is that how applications are made, like we're getting more towards electronic applications than paper applications. So those things change from time to time as technology changes. So, changing a bylaw is a drawn out long process. Changing a regulation is a public hearing by the planning board and gets done in one night. As far as the technical things about shutting one down, again, these technical specs may change from time to time. And again, it's easier dealt with as a regulation for future changes and to be flexible than to deal with it in a bylaw.
and so the regulations are out of scope, Tom, right now for this work.
What do you mean?
I mean, so there's a whole bunch of stuff. I mean,
I don't want to sound cranky, but I brought in the Alternative Energy Committee as a courtesy. Okay, this is amending a zoning bylaw. Okay, and it's your committee that deals with this stuff, but you don't get into the permitting process at all. It's done by other boards, and it is simply an easier to manage bylaw if a lot of stuff that doesn't need to be in a bylaw was a regulation, because it can be, again, the reason to do that is to change it. Not changing any of the substance that's written today, just moving it. Other than the idea of bringing in smaller scale turbines into permitted use. If you don't want to do it, if it's not feasible to do that, fine. It seems to me.
Yeah, I think we, well, certainly I understand that ask, and
then if there's no substantive change being made, then both of these articles are just housekeeping. They're just housekeeping to make them the bylaw part shorter and sweeter with the existing text, and to move out application materials and some of the technical shutdown things and setbacks and all. Well, the setbacks would be in the bylaw, but to take out the stuff that can change more rapidly from time to time and put them into regulations so that they can be subsequently changed on our end more easily. That's all.
So Tom,
it's a housekeeping effort.
I think I understand what you're saying. You want to get the regulations where regulations belong and bylaws where bylaws belong. But I think what the point that Chris is making is we don't have regulations or bylaws that cover residential type units. The thing so those would have to be developed, is because the big tower regulations nobody will ever have a turbine in their home if they have to follow those, I think.
No, I understand that. I understand that. I've seen a rooftop turbine. I've seen a turbine on a pole in somebody's backyard. We have other height regulations for things of that already in the bylaw. We have.
I think it's a 3 foot.
We just retooled those in the last fall for solar panels, for either being on a roof or being a standalone structure in a yard. I guess my point is that that kind of stuff, the height limits and all of that and setbacks, that's not rocket science. And it's not difficult to do and difficult to write. The first threshold question is, do we want to allow such turbines on that smaller scale to be utilized in Cohasset as another part of alternative energy? Yes or no?
Exactly.
If we don't, fine, we leave the bylaw the way it is and we just regulate large turbines, and everything under those sizes are prohibited.
Well, I mean, as a straw dog, Tom, I mean, residential turbines, we call it 15 kilowatts.
Okay,
And you put that in the bylaw,
yeah.
and then we worry about somebody else worries about their regulations down the road. And what we'll find
Not a
out is,
question. No. What does a 15 kilowatt turbine look like?
yeah, it's
Where
pretty.
does it go?
It's huge.
Does it go on a
It's
roof?
huge.
It's huge.
No.
No, it doesn't go on a roof.
Okay, then what do you need for an individual? I mean, let's pick a building, pick Avalon, all right? Multifamily housing complex. What do they need to power themselves?
Well, first of all, they need a lot more land than they have because the tower would have to be set 1.5 times away from any residence.
Okay,
So if you imagine a tower of,
all right. I guess what is, I guess it's different from commercial buildings and multifamily buildings and single residential homes. What's the power generation need for those types of buildings?
Yeah, so for my house, I would probably need about a 15 kilowatt wind turbine.
Okay, and what does that 15 kilowatt turbine look like?
It's about 130 feet tall.
Okay.
On a tower.
Then the answer is it won't work. So the answer is
Right.
we don't do it. Okay, fine,
The tower's too tall for the lot.
fine.
there are accessory mini turbine, micro turbines that you can use to charge your batteries, your RV or your sailboat.
Yep.
And those you can put on your roof, you can put them on a small tower. But anything that you're going to actually power your entire house with is
Oh.
big.
That's the answer to my question, and it's not feasible to do, and we won't do it. So then what's proposed is just simply housekeeping, moving stuff into regulation. The other night, the bylaws are no longer going to be Articles 19 and Article 20. They're now going to be sections of Article 10. But other than that renumbering, which is already simple.
Do we want to allow people to put in micro vertical axis towers that are smaller? Do we want to? I mean, I don't know that anybody even would want to because they're expensive and they're not as productive as solar. So they're not really economically attractive
At the moment.
at the moment, but
But
I mean, we could always,
times will change.
yeah, we could change the bylaw later.
You can always
when-
write regulations.
Right.
Well, Tom, in anticipation of like a super advanced technology coming along in a few years, can we just stick a residential limit of 15 kilowatt into the zoning and
We don't have to do anything at the moment. We could wait for that technology and amend it in the future.
amend it into the bylaw?
Yeah.
I thought since we had the bylaw book open now, we could throw something in there and even.
Well, you could, but what's the point of allowing something up to 15 kilowatts if it's a prohibitively large structure?
Because
I mean,
in
we're not
preparation
doing-
for something in the future that may be give us flexibility in the future, so you don't have to go back and redo the zoning. You can just go to regs and
Okay, but our current zoning has height limits on other things like you know, giant commercial signs on 3A. And I mean, we went through all of those height limits last fall when we amended some things.
Well, the way that you have it written right now, you've got a 3-foot cap above any structure in your yard. So if you put something on top of your house, it couldn't be 3 feet, more than 3 feet tall. Or if
Right.
you put a pole in the backyard with the turbine on it, the total height couldn't be higher than 3 foot taller than the house.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we could leave it like that and nobody would do
Yeah.
it.
Well, that's, yeah, I mean, I don't want to write something that's not going to be used or makes no sense. So I just assume if the technology doesn't exist to have an efficient wind turbine at an individual building scale, then we don't do it. We just continue to do what we do now, which is regulate large turbines. And the way we regulate large turbines, the chances of any new large turbine ever being built in this town is probably slim to none. I mean, I believe that, you know, the whole world, we got to change our ways of thinking and allow these things to happen, but people still scream about wind turbines. I think they're
All right.
completely irrational, and all that nonsense that's gone on in Situate has been nuts, frankly.
And Martha, your point that they're little twirly birds that will recharge a battery, a car
Yeah.
battery or something.
Yeah.
That's sort of not really in scope here either.
And what's the kilowatt generation of that?
I think it's around 2.5 to 4 kilowatts.
Oh, really? That big?
It's not insignificant. It's just not enough to power your house.
Okay.
400 watts, 400 to 500 watts is what I'm looking at here.
And what, Tom, what do they look like?
You remember the old vents, the rotating vents that used to go on a roof?
Yeah.
Like
And some of them are
twisted steel just turning around.
exactly.
Yeah.
The wind turns are just like the old vents. The other version is the mini tower with the traditional propeller with about an 8-foot diameter, which is still huge.
There's the vertical axis one that looks like an egg beater.
Correct.
It's it can be 15 feet tall
Right.
to 35 feet, but it needs an acre of clear land around it to be effective. So
I mean, I think to Tom's point, I think the requirements for wind so that you have a clear shot at getting some wind to spin your turbine requires a lot larger than most people have in Cohasset.
right, we're talking about the
I mean,
prairie.
Well, let me, it's like an Avalon, or, you know, we just passed this MBTA district. What if somebody does come in and build a multifamily project? For example, there's one of the properties that's now in that district is 8 acres. Theoretically, they could do 120 units. If you had a project of that scale, I mean, they put solar panels on the roof is probably their first choice, but if they chose wind, what would they need?
They probably need a big tower. I mean,
they would.
They would definitely need a big tower. I mean, the power just one house. I said, and we were already talking about a tower that's 100 with the extended blade 130 feet high for a house, I guess. So you probably the apartments would consume maybe a quarter of my house's energy. So maybe one of those would power four. But yeah, Tom, I think it's sort of.
So I guess what I'm hearing is the wind technology isn't as advanced and varied as I thought it might be.
Not yet.
Not for residential in a way that is going to work. I think, especially with the lot sizes that we have, I don't see it. I mean, we did some research. We talked to some manufacturers. We talked to the Distributed Wind Energy Association. We received a good amount of materials, and having reviewed all of that, it does seem like a stretch.
Okay. Simple enough.
Well, Martha, we might be mission accomplished here, right?
Yeah, so what?
Unless we want to talk about battery storage.
That's another big issue.
Yeah, well, so now the reorganization of the bylaw, the new Article 10 is titled Alternative Energy. section 10.1 is the wind bylaw, section 10.2 is the solar bylaw. You know, you've got other ideas for the future, that's where they'll plug in.
Would
10.3.
now be a good time to plug something in while we're revamping
Well,
everything?
yeah, I just circulated a memo, I copied you on it, Martha, to everybody that, you know.
Oh,
we
I did not see
we-
that. Was that
that's all right.
today?
Yeah, no, it's, you know, late reading if you can't sleep tonight. I urge you
Okay.
to pick it up and read it. It's perfect for that. You know, it's been through, I don't know, what do we have? 3 town meeting cycles, 4? Originally, the hope was we'd get this done in 3, so the fall is it. I mean, I'm done, certainly. I did say in that memo, like, if there's new initiatives coming down the pike about climate change and climate resiliency, those are in the future, and that's for somebody else to do. So I'm looking at for the fall to finish up the reform of the bylaw. You know, again, we had 7 articles at this last town meeting. Right now, there'd be no more than 7, probably, but that depends on which other changes we take on. So if you want to add something else on a new form of alternative energy to plug into the bylaw, now would be the time. But, you know, with the timeline for an early December town meeting, we need it done by September.
Yeah. Well, we do have an idea.
And, you know, in terms of plugging where it needs to plug in and formatting it, I can take care of that part. But, you know, you can create a new section 10.3, you know, battery storage or whatever you want to call it. And again, you know, the material that would be good in the bylaw goes to the bylaw. If it's not, if it's material that's better set in the regulation. You know, what I'm also trying to do is compile all the land use related regulation for all the boards into one volume, similar to the way that the state does their regulations. And that's also been written in a draft form. You know, if it has to do with zoning, it's going to have a place where it goes. And, you know, in the future, those regulations need to change. You guys find, you know, well, we're not taking applications that way anymore, or we want to change it. You just tell the planning board, have the planning board conduct a public hearing to change your regulation. You know, all the zoning related regulations will get changed by either the planning board or the zoning board, mostly the planning board.
So
But
Tom,
nobody-
if the wind technology changes significantly in the next, I don't know, 1 to 2 years, would we be able to go to the planning board and ask them to add in?
Yeah, again,
Accessories.
if you have it in front of you, which parts of the current bylaw will be moving out into regulations, but you know, there could be new regulations of things that are going to change. And, you know, each time if you want to make a change, you know, it first has to be reviewed as to whether it needs to be changed in the bylaw or just in the regulations. And yeah, if it's a regulation, all that's required to amend a zoning regulation is a public hearing conducted by the planning board, which can be noticed on, you know, in 15, 20 days notice, I think 21 days notice. And it's simple, and then it's just done. As the bylaw, you got to go through all of this process. You know, so
Okay, well, that's great.
with the risk of, you know, trying to educate the public on something very technical that they don't understand, and then they turn it down because they don't understand. So, but, you know, for these housekeeping changes, since we're moving stuff out, we have to go through this bylaw amendment process. So, you know, if what I would do with the wind bylaw, I guess right now is as part of the housekeeping, I'd leave a reserved section perhaps for residential or single building use, or call it something, smaller generators or something. And leave it there for the future, and when the technology makes it feasible to allow people to try to do these things, then you can plug stuff in.
That sounds good.
You know, the new organizational structure, I think, is going to just be easier to add new stuff without, you know, it got to be a mess. We kept adding articles onto the bylaw, and it just became an organizational nightmare. But so what I'll do is you know, just do a new cleaner version. The latest version I did was in February, so just do a new cleaner version. You'll see what the resulting bylaw will look like, what's being moved to a regulation. It'll be that simple. And if you want new stuff, then just let me know and I'll help you put it in there.
Great.
I would prefer not to have to deal with this beyond the fall. I'm personally burnt out from it. So it's been 3 years of bylaw stuff, 3.5 weeks.
That's a long time.
That sounds tedious.
No, and it's because the committee is not, the bylaw committee doesn't really function much.
Hmm.
You know, one thing is being postponed from the fall that should have been on the spring, but fellow planning board members don't understand it. One opposes it, and he's managed to stir up the pot. And, you know, it just gets, you know, I've told you this, Martha, I'm just burnt out from it. You know, I mean, it was very rewarding to see everything go through easily, and there was no big fight about the MBTA thing, which is stupid law, but nevertheless, we had to comply with it. But, and, you know, that was rewarding. So I just want to see it through. But, you know, I'm giving everybody the heads up with this memo that I circulated, just, you know, get ready for another package of like 7 bylaws to be done. And if there's an 8th one to bring in battery usage into our bylaw, great. And if you guys don't know, the one part of the bylaw that passed in the fall in Article 4 about solar energy was recharging stations. There was something we put in the Article 4 about recharging stations and about them being free. I think that was the one part that was rejected. The Attorney General didn't reject the whole thing. They only rejected a part of it, but it had to do with recharging stations. If you're not aware of that, I'll have to get that to you. So perhaps we fix that.
Okay.
We fixed that too in the fall, whatever that was. But there was a memo from town council and that got it. Everything else that we passed in the fall about solar energy and, you know, finally allowing in writing for individual house panels, and that was all approved. And that's all I was thinking here is wind is doing the same thing we do, allow for solar on an individual scale, building scale. But if it's not feasible, it's not feasible.
Yeah, it's one thing if you live on the prairie out in Montana.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's different here.
It's just a shame because we have all this wind all the time. You know?
Mm.
I remember somebody telling me years ago, Boston is windier than Chicago. And yet they get the name.
Well, I mean, if we could put a turbine up at the top of Turkey Hill, that would be good.
Yeah, okay.
Well, thank you so
Can
much.
you do me a favor? Send me everybody's email.
Sure, yeah.
Or I'll just circulate it that I don't necessarily know if I have to come to a meeting, and you'll just see what the proposal is. And then those 2 articles be out of the way and done. It's some other fish to fry for the thing for the fall. But
All right.
again, your timeline for something new would be really September. Because anything with the zoning bylaw then has to go to a public hearing at the planning board to give a recommendation. That's circulated to the select board, circulated to the advisory committee, circulated to the zoning board of appeals, get everybody's buy-in and input to it. So it really has to be done early, mid-September at the latest.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you so much. And thanks for putting all the work into redoing the bylaws. It's a lot of work and nobody wants to do it. So
Yeah.
thank you.
I appreciate it very much. Thanks for your time.
All right.
I'll leave you though. Bye.
Okay, great. Well, thank you so much,
Yeah,
Tom.
thanks, Tom.
Yeah.
Thanks,
bye.
Tom.
Okay. Doran, I think everybody has your update, but if you want to tell us anything new about the fabricators and installers information.
Yeah, sure. I'll take a few minutes, but not many based on the way that conversation went. I think basically we're in a position where a lot of what's, manufactured regularly is either too small for the, the kind of residential applications that we're thinking of, or the 15 kilowatt standard, which the Berge manufacturer, the CEO there was telling me is pretty much there their standard kit these days is pretty big for the application that we have. And he did mention, and I'll just kind of, this will drive the point home about comments about Montana, is that they're the lion's share of their sales are agricultural. So the agricultural applications where you have, that kind of power necessary to power a barn, to power water pumps, whatever it might be. That's the real popular application where you just don't have the setback and height restrictions that you would have in a town like Cohasset.
Mhm.
So that's kind of what I heard there. I think that I did notify you all that one of the qualified installers for Verge did reach out to me. I did not connect with him after that, but we certainly could, speak with him a little bit more. But it does seem that this is maybe a little bit of a dead end for us. I guess the second thing is that I'm going to go ahead and observe is that the history of resistance to wind turbines, even if they're large turbines, one would expect similar resistance to smaller ones. And I think that also means that perhaps it's not something that's going to carry a lot of practical weight to insert into the bylaws. I'm not
That's
sure
a
if
good
there's
point. I was gonna
more,
insist that we look at the vertical axis turbines, but that point is so true. If people didn't want the big ones, they're not going to want the little ones in their neighbor's yard.
Well, the little ones aren't that little anyway. So
That's right.
yeah, I was actually at the electrical union headquarters on Saturday for an event. I looked at those whirlybirds. I mean, they're very high, and didn't look like they had a lot of capacity, is my sense of it. So that would be a problem too.
yeah,
And
I think
putting the towers up is not unlike the old problem with radio operators putting a tower up until the federal government stepped in and said you can't regulate. I mean, people don't want a big tower next door.
Yeah, I think you're right. Okay, well then we probably don't need to pursue it anymore at this point. Unless anybody else feels strongly differently. So what about battery charging? Do we want to pursue that? Doran, I think you have some contacts that can.
so. What I will do is, and let's my suggestion is that I continue to pursue the same sort of information flow that I got on the wind with respect to residential and small scale commercial battery installations, model bylaws or model regulations that we can take a look at. As soon as I have that information, I'll circulate it. We can probably schedule another subcommittee meeting to talk about that a little bit more. My suspicion is for Massachusetts, because of the various programs here in the state, those will be more developed for local application and perhaps other towns surrounding in the surrounding area in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
So that we may get to a kind of decision as to what belongs in the bylaws, what belongs in regulation, and be able to kind of hand Tom a set of proposed bylaws. They may not match up with what other towns do. Other towns may be putting everything in bylaws. We'll try to keep that to a minimum so that, as Tom suggested, as technology changes, the regulations can simply change. And we just kind of stick with the big picture items for the bylaws. But as soon as I get that, I would suggest that if we have the opportunity now, between now and the end of the summer, to together as a group, kind of put some suggestions to Tom, I think it'd be worthwhile, because that's something that I expect to be more and more popular. And we already know that from a practical perspective, across the country, the installation of residential and small scale batteries is happening. Sometimes coupled with solar, sometimes not. But I think that that's certainly more. It's going to have more practical application for the residents of the town than the distributed wind.
Mhm. Great. I know, yes, it does seem like an obvious choice. You know, that I have on the agenda the solar bylaw, but I think it really is it's just rearranging things, the proposed bylaw changes. There's nothing that we really need to add or take away. And the Palmer Capital meeting, I sent you all the summary of what we talked about, and I think the biggest thing that came out of that was the idea to pursue the battery charging bylaw change or addition. So I think that's that. Does anybody have anything else? Great.
Nothing further from me.
Okay, great. Well,
Nothing.
thank you all so much. This was really productive and helpful.
Thank you, Martha.
All
Thank you,
right.
Martha.
Okay, take care,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye.
Take care
Good
all.
night.
Bye.
Good night,
Bye.
everybody.